Hey friends, Kim from Stamping Imperfection. Thank you for joining me. I have a bunch of tips I want to share with you about coloring with alcohol markers. And these tips would apply to if you're a beginner watercolorist or if you're a beginner with colored pencils or whatever kind of alcohol marker you use. Like, I think these tips really apply to all of that. Now I'm using Copic markers here, and this stamp set is called Blooming Bunch from Trinity Stamps. And I love this because my first tip is keep it simple. Like, some images are so intricate, you can't always tell where one petal ends and another one starts. You can't always tell what's a petal and what's a leaf. Like, really find some images with big spaces like this one where you can play with the color and try different combinations, and you have room to actually do several different colors. Like on the flowers, I used 4 different shades to blend together. On the leaves, I only used 3 because it was a smaller space. Sometimes I only use 2 if the leaves are super small. And another thing here is you'll notice that I like to go from darkest to lightest, and I generally only go through once with my markers. I know real colorists go through a couple of times to really get the ink to blend, but I start with the darkest. I basically outline things, but not the entire thing. I will put that darker color where I think it should be darkest, or where I find it appealing, like in the crevices, along the edges of petals, the base of the petal, the base of the leaves. And then I will take the next lightest color and go over what I just did and make that next color wider. And then I'll do the third lightest color and do the same thing. I go over the previous color, then make it a little wider. And then I take that lightest color and fill it all in. And I go over the other colors a little bit so that as the colors dry, and it takes a little while for your colors to dry, the alcohol, I believe, is actually evaporating. But as the colors dry, they blend together. So it looks a little bit different in an hour. If you wait an hour, it'll look a lot different. You'll see a difference in the coloring because your colors have had time to play together and blend together. Use the right ink pad when you start. Like, I've discovered that I really like Maker Forte's Color Hive Eclipse black ink for working with my alcohol markers, and I like it because I can stamp it and start coloring right away, and the color doesn't bleed. That ink pad would be totally inappropriate for watercoloring because it's a dye ink and it's water reactive, so it would bleed something fierce if I use it with watercolors. But I love it for my alcohol markers. And another thing is, a lot of people are reluctant to get started with alcohol markers because they're pricey. You don't need all of them. You need, the colors that you like to play with the most. You need 3 or 4 colors that will blend together nicely, and collect them over time as you find sales. That's what I've been doing. And I didn't start with Copic markers. I started with Altenews alcohol markers, and I love them. I still play with my Altenew artist markers because they come in sets of 12, and usually there's 3 different color families there. So I can do a lot of stuff with one set of 12, and there's 4 shades of each one of those 3 different color families. So somebody else has picked the colors that blend well together, which is a very nice thing when you're starting. You don't have to think about what colors you need to blend together. And I like the alcohol marker or the Altenew markers because they are refillable, and you can get replacement nibs in case, because when you're new at stuff, you don't always use things correctly. So that's what I like about it. Some of the other alcohol markers that I tried didn't have a lot of ink in them and they weren't refillable, so the price point seemed really cheap until I started using them and I realized I was replacing them a lot more often than, my Copics. I've had for years, and my Ultra markers I've had for years. I'm just getting to the point where I have to start refilling them. So one tip I have, like, there are some spaces here where I went outside the lines, and that's okay, because I learned from Kelly Taylor, who is an expert colorist, that she takes a journaling pen and goes over all of the black lines with her journaling pen. And I like to do that as well on not all of my images, but on some of my images, or I'll just go over a few of them if I can get away with it. Like this one, I could get away with it. And my journaling pen, like the Le Pen, is good. I really like the Winsor & Newton ones, but you want a size 0.3 or 0.5 at the most to go over the lines, and you can kind of go over the outside edge of the line, so you actually clean up the edges if you went outside the line, or if your color did a little bleeding outside the line because you put a lot of color on that spot. And you notice that I also covered this with splatter. Sometimes I do a watercolor wash on the background. That also cleans things up, and the splatter makes sure you don't notice all of that. And experiment. Another thing, when you're done coloring, let that sit for a while, because your colors will play together while they sit. So let it sit for a while and then come back to it and see how you like it once it's dried. And then another thing you can do is take a picture with your phone. Taking a picture with your phone can make a huge difference, because somehow it'll look different to you on that phone, and you can see the contrast and all the shading that you did. So those are my tips. I hope they're helpful. Thank you so much for watching, friends. Have a wonderful day.